Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Northern Regional Advisory Council meeting. At 6 p.m. We'll call this meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person at the Weber County Commission chambers, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. This RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It's why we're here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. We expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior includes booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking. You can also help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC chair will remind attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, the applicable individual will be asked to leave. Lastly, please help reduce distractions during the meeting by putting your phone on silent. And if you need to take a call, we ask that you step outside. We also ask, as we leave here today, to exit out the west front door of the building, please. Okay. With that, we'd like to welcome RAC members and go through introductions. Want to start over here with Nikki?
Nikki Wayment. Do we have a new one? Watchable Wildlife. It's called it.
Rob Dale, Public at Large.
James Carlson, Public at Large.
Ryan Brown, Public at Large.
Randy Hutchison at Large. Avery Cook, U.S. Forest Service.
Ross Worthington, Public at Large.
Darren Perry, Shoshone Nation.
And I'm Brad Buchanan, representing Sportsman. I believe we also have Jamie online. Okay. Not on there yet. We do want to excuse. Echo. All right. We do want to excuse Junior Goring, Casey, and David Earl. We will acknowledge online, see a couple of members of the Wildlife Board, Kent Johnson, Gary Nielsen, and Paula Richmond. So welcome them. We do want to welcome the DWR staff, specifically those providing presentations tonight. Brian Christensen, Kobe Jones, Chad Bettridge, Chad Wilson, Chelsea Duke, and Heather Talley. Welcome the public that are attending in person and that are watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out the comment card for the item you wish to address. See that we receive it prior to the RAC discussion. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, presentations were provided for viewing online and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for the meeting. Okay, with that, start off with call for approval of the agenda and minutes from the last meeting.
I'd like the motion to approve the agenda minutes.
Second.
Okay, motion by Randy, seconded by James. Well, no discussion on the motion. Want to just take a vote by raising hands? Motion passes unanimous. I'd like to welcome Steve. He can introduce himself now.
Steve Sorensen, representing Big Game. Sportsman. Sorry, wrong one again. Once again.
Yeah. All right. Next up is the Wildlife Board update from the last meeting that took place a couple weeks ago. So we had First motion was the taking big game rule amendments, and had a motion to ask the division to look into the use of aerial equipment for hunting and retrieval of game, and that was to be placed on the action log. That passed unanimously. And then had a motion to approve the recommendations for the taking big game rule amendments as presented by the division. That passed unanimously. For the deer permit recommendations for 2025, a motion to approve the deer permit recommendations as presented with the Beaver West reduction as amended by the division, and that passed unanimously. The once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2025 had a motion to ask the division to look at procedures of how to contact and notify hunters when a hunt is available due to a lone sheep disease outbreak. And this was to be added to the action log and division to report back to the board. That motion passed unanimously. Had a motion to accept the once in a lifetime permit recommendations as presented. That passed unanimously. And the bull elk permit recommendations for 2025, the motion was to approve as presented. That passed unanimously. On the antelope permit recommendations for 2025, the motion was to approve as presented. That passed unanimously. The antlerless permit recommendations, the motion was to approve as presented, and that passed unanimously. The CWMU antlerless permit recommendations, the motion was to approve as presented, and that passed 4 in favor with 1 recusal. The landowner permit rule amendments had 2 motions. The first was to ask the division to look into private landowner vouchers in relation to losing points and incurring waiting periods. The proposal is to be brought to the board as an informational item prior to presenting it through the public process. And that was to be placed on the action log. That passed unanimously. The next motion was to approve as presented by the division with the exception that we add in the criteria for House Bill 202 tags to evaluate public benefit. And that passed unanimously. On the Expo rule amendments, the motion was to approve as presented, and that passed unanimously. For the West Willow Creek CWMU, Hiawatha, and Preston Nutter Ranch CWMU buck and bull recommendations, that motion was to pass as presented, and that passed unanimously. Any questions from the board? Last board meeting from anyone? Okay. All right, we'll move to regional update.
Okay, thank you. My name's Jim Christensen. I'm filling in for Blair Stringham. He's out of state this week, so I'll do the best I can here. Okay, next slide. In our administrative section right now, so draw results come out last night. If anybody has not yet checked out their login on the administrative site, you can go on and see if you drew. With those draws coming out, we are getting ready to sell the harvest objective elk tags for 5 CWMUs in the region. These CWMUs are chronically over objective on their elk populations right now, and so this is another tool in the toolbox to help keep that population trending downwards. We have been seeing a slight downward trend last year, and so we'll keep on the gas to keep those numbers coming down. Next slide. In aquatics, they've been out on Willard Bay doing a walleye spawn. We got a little video here if it will work, pulling a fish out of the nets. But anyway, they collected 9.5 million eggs in just 5 days of netting and stocked 2.5 million walleye fry back into Willard Bay. The walleye, wiper, and catfish populations are looking great this year, and it's already been been a good year so far through April and early May. Next slide. Other work they've been doing some gillnet surveys up at Lost Creek, Causey, and East Canyon reservoirs, some spotted frog surveys in the Upper Provo and Weber areas. They went out and stalked tiger muskies in Pineview and Newton reservoirs. I know they just did some of those yesterday in Pineview, and they're catching and spawning Bear Lake cutthroat trout over in Rich County. Out on the Great Salt Lake, they recently completed the Intermountain West Shorebird Survey, and that's a survey across the entire lake. They've been doing, or they have also been doing some field collections for the waterfowl portion of the bioenergetics research study. They got that completed, and they're moving on to the shorebird portion of that study now. As they were doing waterfowl surveys, they're also doing the waterbird surveys, and they got those completed, starting a snowy plover lakeside survey later this month. And the pelicans have come back to Gunnison and Hat Islands. The last update I seen, there were about 400 individuals on Gunnison and about 1,000 on Hat Island. So that's good news there. Next slide. Also out there on the Great Salt Lake, they have 2 new employees working for them. Their new wildlife biologist too is Jesselyn Bowman. She has been working in the Salt Lake office, and so she transferred out there to GSLEP, and then they hired Spencer Baxter as a new wildlife technician. Out on the waterfowl management areas, they've been busy the last couple of weeks. The weather has aligned just right to meet their burn windows for prescriptive burns out on the Phragmites treatments. So they burned over 2,000 acres on Harold Crane, Ogden Bay, Bear River Bay, and Salt Creek WMAs. And they've been doing that like every year in cooperation with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And they've been a great partner for doing this for several years out there. So appreciate their help on doing that. With our habitat section, that's loud. In our habitat section, we have 2 new employees there, or I guess Josh Butcher is not new. He's been working with the habitat crew in the habitat maintenance section with that crew. Been doing good things over there. He's recently been promoted to the habitat restoration biologist. And we have a new impact analysis biologist. Her name is Sarah Kappel. She's been recently, her last job was with the Ogden Nature Center. So we're excited to have both of them working in those positions now, and have high expectations for them. They're very, very capable to produce good results, and we're excited to have them. Good news with the habitat section. Melissa Early's been working to get a grant to do some studies out there and to do some fence modification, some habitat work. The grant was initially funded, and then it was frozen. But recently that grant was unfrozen, so we can get that money to go in, look at roadkill along I-84 between basically Tremonton and Snowville, or the state line out there. Look at improving some fences to make them more wildlife friendly, doing some habitat improvements, and then that highway study, so we can see about mitigating roadkill on that stretch of the freeway. In our outreach section, Rachel Tuckett, our walking access biologist, has been doing a lot of work, either setting up or renewing all the walk-in access contracts that are due right now. Just for those who don't know, walk-in access properties are private lands open to public hunting or fishing. And there's 73 of those in northern Utah. There were 3 new fishing properties added in 2024 and 2 new hunting properties should join here in 2025. So it's a great program. We're grateful for the landowners that will open up their property for public access. Recently up at Hardware WMA, there was a beginning archery clinic. The participants were taught about archery equipment and how to shoot and sight in their bows. They had shooting bags and 3D targets to shoot at. And just a huge thanks goes out to the Cash Archers Association for providing instruction and being up there and helping out. I know there's one instance that was highlighted of a single mom that took or maybe as a stepmom is what it was, that took a couple girls up there, got these bows as presents, went up to shoot them and found out that the bows had been set up wrong. And so the volunteers up there helped get the bows set up right, got them shooting and helped them out. And if they would have gone back to the store, that I think I remember the value would have been about $450 or $250 to help them get set up. So appreciate those guys up there helping out. Next slide. From the wildlife section, we just got done with our sage and sharp-tailed grouse select counts. From the initial data, it's looking like we're slightly up on our sage grouse counts, which is a good thing. Not quite as high as we were last year, but we'll take the increase regardless. Sharp-tailed grouse, we're still a little too early to say where we're at on that. But the last couple of years for all upland game species, it's been really, really good. And we've seen some good population increases on them. So we're hopeful that will continue into this year. With our spring deer classifications, we're just finishing those up too. We're seeing record high survival since we've been putting GPS collars on. We're well over 90% on our adult doe survival and around the 80% fawn survival, which is incredible as well. So that's a good thing. We've been building populations the last couple of years, and so this will help keep that trending up also. We just started doing bighorn sheep lambing surveys out on Antelope Island, seeing what our production is out there with our bighorn sheep. Adam Brewerton, our conservation species biologist, has been busy expanding our MODIS network. He went down to the St. George area and helped set up another tower there to help with our monitoring efforts on a lot of species that way. And then doing bat surveys, been busy with those. Okay, next slide. For RAC member opportunities, if you want to get out and go look for the bighorn sheep out on Antelope Island, just let us know. We'll get you out there. We've got a schedule set up through the end of May, and once we get there, if it looks like we need to keep going into June, we'll open up some more days there. But anybody who wants to go out, you're welcome to come. Just let us know. Okay, and then last but not least here, just a huge thank you. We've got 4 members of our RAC that this will be their last meeting. So just want to send a huge shout out and thanks to David Earl, Junior Goring, Randy Hutchison, and Nikki Wayment. Grateful that you joined Team Wildlife. Grateful for your comments and your help. Hate to see you go. Excited to see who we can get in to fill your shoes too. They've got big shoes to fill, and so we do have some parting gifts for you, or a parting gift. We've got a nice frame print over there. We'll have to deliver David and Junior's to them, but for Nikki and Randy, we've got that here for you. So appreciate all your service. That's my update.
Thanks, Jim. We'll echo that from Randy, Nikki, Junior, David. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate your guys' service and time you put into being on the RAC. So, any questions for Jim from the regional update from anyone? do have a question. Do we happen to know on those additional antlerless elk permits that were in place last year on the CWMUs, how many, I guess, of the second permits were filled? We know that?
I'm not sure that we know that. We just have we can give you the total number of harvested, but I don't know. I haven't seen it anyway, if they've been split out.
Okay.
When you talk about the additional walk-in access unit or areas for hunting, is that upland only or big game and upland, or does it differentiate?
It depends on the contract that they want to enroll in. And so we will have that listed on the website, what they are open to. But yeah, some of them are open to all species, but others are just upland game only or just fishing only.
All right, thank you. We have Jessica's joined us. Want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Jessica Wade, and I'm here representing Bureau of Land Management.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, dedicated hunter rule amendments, and this is banking hours. Brian Christensen.
Good evening. I'm Brian Christensen, and I oversee the dedicated hunter program for the state. So I'm glad to be here and answer whatever questions you have for me.
Okay, let's start off with any questions from RAC members on this agenda item. Okay, any questions from the public? All right. Move to summarize public comments.
Okay, there were 2 responses. Both of those strongly disagree for a weighted average of 1. Both those comments were about drawing dedicated hunter. You should be allowed to hunt the unit under the rules when they drew, similar to like the restricted weapons change. And then the other comment was if the hunt is canceled, they want the hours work refunded or transferred.
Okay, thank you. And no public comment cards on this agenda item, so we'll open it up for RAC discussion.
Do you know, I'd be curious just to have you respond, give you a chance to respond to those.
To those 2?
Public comments.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And if anyone would like a real brief summary of the recommendation, I'd be happy to do that too for you as well. For the 2 comments, I did get to read through those. The dedicated hunter program is a tricky one because it is a 3-year situation. And in most cases, we're able to allow those 3 years to remain unchanged. There are some situations where hunts do get changed from a general season standpoint that can impact dedicated hunters. So last year, it was actually almost a year and a half ago, if I remember right, we had some discussion and some proposals about some unit changes that went to the board process. Those didn't pass at the time. They were sent back to the Mule Deer Committee for discussion and review, and then they were brought back this last time and changed. You know, there were changes on the cache, and the 1,000 Lakes unit was discontinued, and the Boulder had some changes. So there were a handful of changes on some of these units with weapons restrictions and things like that. And because of the types of changes that occurred, it wasn't going to work to have general season hunters, you know, the rifle hunter out doing one thing and dedicated hunters doing different things, where you have some with scopes and some without scopes, some with certain seasons, some without those seasons. And it makes it easier for someone like the wildlife studies, for the management side of things, to have all general season hunters doing the same thing, whether it's with or without the scopes or whatever. And so when the original proposals came about, we saw that as something that we probably needed to have in rule, that if dedicated hunters, if their units changed or the seasons or boundaries or other aspects of those general season hunts changed, that we would be subject to that as well and not exempt from those things. Now, we do try to limit that in any situation we can. We want to let dedicated hunters continue with the full 3 years as they anticipated. In some of these other situations, it was just not feasible to do that. And so the old rule, years ago, did say that dedicated hunters were subject to any change that occurred. We revised that to be a little more clear and spell out boundaries, season lengths, weapon types, things like along those lines, so that it was just a lot more clear for everybody. And then those units did have some changes. So we have it in rule that we can do that. Now, these two particular comments, the one is along the same lines. I want to draw something and have it the whole 3 years. When we can, we do. We certainly don't want to disrupt that. But in these 5 units that were changed, we just couldn't do that. The other one, the comment about, what was it? The service hours purchased and the service hours that have been completed. If a hunt's canceled or changed, they wanted those to be either refunded or transferred. The refunds are actually governed by a different set of rules and laws. It's not by the dedicated hunter program, but through my experience in the past year, I saw a little bit greater need to have that spelled out just a little bit more clearly. And so refunds are really subject to other rules, and we're only allowed to issue refunds for very certain circumstances, and we don't have exceptions. So having it in the dedicated hunter rule that says if you bought your service hours, they're not refundable, just helps it be more visible rather than digging deeper and deeper and deeper until you find where it really says that we're just not authorized to do it. So part of that is I've added, I put in a request, and it may be there. I haven't looked in the last little week or so, to have, when you go in to purchase surface hours online, we've added a phrase that will say, if it's not there yet, it will, to say we don't recommend, I don't know the exact wording, but it basically says we don't recommend purchasing service hours that you don't need yet. So if you only need 6 for this year, don't buy 32, because you may have to withdraw from the program for any kind of reason. You might move out of state, get a job change, heaven forbid, be injured or get sick. There are reasons why you maybe don't want to pre-purchase all 32 hours up front. And so we're going to try to do a little better job of helping people not do more than just what they need. And then as far as service hours being transferred or refunded, it's really hard to do that. If somebody's done volunteer service, how do you value 4.2 hours of working on a fence line? And we don't really have a system to say, well, we'll hang on to those 4 hours for 6 or 8 years in advance, and then just hang on to find out what those are. So we want those volunteer hours to just remain volunteerism. And hopefully we don't have the situation where a hunt is canceled or changed in a way that impacts people. But it can, and it did happen this past year with some of these hunts. And in that case, where we really couldn't refund service, we allowed those units to be able to pick a different unit. When their hunt was impacted so much, they could pick a different unit. And most didn't. Most stayed where they were and utilized what they had. So we still try to make it even as far as what they'd put into it being valuable somewhere else. But to refund hours is just a complicated thing. So I know that was long-winded.
No,
But
that's
hopefully
perfect. I
helpful.
just wanted you to have a chance to respond to those
Yeah.
because I thought those were legitimate.
They really are. And I appreciate the folks that put those comments in so that they can be talked about.
Then on this specifically, I really like this, being able to bank the hours, for lack of a better term, bank those hours. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Can I make one kind of point on that? Because I really, really want the public to understand that When we talk about the word banking, it has a connotation, and I almost want you to think about it more like a prepaid debit card that has an expiration date. It's a little bit different than just being able to store them up. And I know there are folks that are interested in seeing us be able to store up service hours from year to year, like we do bonus points or preference points. And this proposal isn't quite that way. It's more of just an expanded window for the few months before, from January up until the draw results happen. It lets people do service during that time frame. And if they draw, we'll go back and look and see if they've done service, and then we'll put that into their 3-year period rather than storing it from year to year to year. And I want to make sure everybody's really, really clear about that's a difference. So I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we're opened up for RAC discussion. Any other comments on this? Okay, entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we accept it as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Ryan, seconded by Ross to accept the dedicated hunter rule amendment as presented. We'll call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. All right. On to agenda item number 6, conservation permit program rule amendments with Kobe. I believe he's online. Kobe, anything you want to start us off with or any clarifications with this one?
No, I think I'm good. This is just changes that we need to make in order to accommodate an MOU with Marks that was more friendly to hunters.
Okay. Start off, any questions from RAC members on this?
No, okay, I'm going to. I'm going to. So, Kobe, I actually really like this. That's more a comment for the end, but I like this change that makes it more flexible for the public hunter. What I was going to ask is, I don't know if it will pertain to this. I read the memo. But last year, I believe it was, we brought up the concern about that the bid hunter always had the first shot. His her season always opens sooner. Does this impact that at all? And if not, can that be addressed?
Yes, that's a really good, Randy. So there's another part to this, which is the MOU. And there were some things in the rule that that had our hands tied a little bit on the MOU, but rotating that date wasn't one of them. And the way the MOU is written is that there has to be a public benefit. The way that we're working on it currently. And so the public benefit is either, like in the case of deer, that could be additional management buck permits. So more than just one permit. If it goes back to where there's just one permit, the date would rotate every time. If there is a public benefit in that there's more permits for the public, maybe more ram permits or more deer permits, then that would be viewed as the public benefit. So we just said, whatever we do, we're going to demonstrate a public benefit here so that it's not always catering towards the individual that buys the Antelope Island Special Conservation Permit. That's kind of the way that we're working through it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So Kobe's that, I guess, potentially could change each year depending on how many permits we're giving or something like that. Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah. So if there's only one permit and the permit, we have one conservation permit and one public permit, it would rotate, right? But if we have the opportunity to have more public permits, then it could remain the same as where the conservation hunter gets, you could say, first crack, but public gets 3 permits or 4 permits, and that's the pub. So the lens we look through it as is there's got to be more of a public benefit here, and so it's either the benefit is in more permits, which required the rule change, because before it stated that for every conservation permit you had, or for every public permit you had to have a conservation permit, or the public benefit is that they get the first crack if it's just 1-on-1 every other year.
Okay, so how would we navigate? How are we going to navigate that when season dates are set in November, but permits aren't set till April?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is one of the areas where season dates, this is all spelled out in the memorandum of understanding between us and state parks for the Antelope Island permit. So yeah, it's a little different. The way it works is that state code tells us you're going to hunt Antelope Island and you're going to have a memorandum of understanding that explains it. And so it doesn't follow that regular cycle of we set it in the fall and then set permits in the spring. It follows how it's outlined in the MOU.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from RAC members? Okay. Any questions from the public? All right, I want to summarize public comment on this one.
Yeah, we have one response to this, and they somewhat agree, for a weighted average of 4, and there was no comment with that.
Okay, thank you. We've got one public comment card on this. Angie Wanacott. I'm going to break this mic before the night's over.
I am Angie Wanacott. I'm here supporting, representing SFW, and we're just here to support this conversation, the conservation permit change. So,
Thank you, Angie. Okay, we'll open it up to RAC discussion. All right, entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept it as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Randy, seconded by Rob to accept the conservation permit rule amendments as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, RAC. I appreciate the time, and yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it, Colby. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to agenda item number 7. Outfitters Guides and Spotters Rule Amendments with Chad Bettridge.
Good evening. I'm afraid to speak into the microphone.
Yeah.
My name is Chad Bettridge. I'm the major over the wildlife section of the Division of Law Enforcement. A couple things to clarify in the presentation. One thing to clarify and one item of maybe that we can talk about a little bit. In the presentation, initially the renewal date for the yearly COR was going to be December 31st. Just point something at me. I'm already nervous. But after some consideration, and it was updated in the presentation, I just want to make sure that everybody saw that it was moved from December 31st to March 31st in order to not have to renew during a hunt season. So we pushed it to March 31st. Second item to maybe discuss a little bit is in the application requirements and approval, section R65772-3 2D. Here it talks about in order to fulfill the application requirements, you have to have all necessary federal permits to operate on federal land. We learned from Avery that the Forest Service has the exact same statement in their application process. So they would sort of butt heads up against, and we'd come to a point where we couldn't continue. So we're willing to rephrase that, to strike that, to make sure that, to ensure that the applicants do have the federal land use permit, but that it's not required at the time of their application for ours, if that makes sense. And finally, just reading through some of the public comments. 2E discusses a lot about workers' compensation insurance and liability insurance. We've learned that a lot of the guides and spotters are 1099 contracted employees, which wouldn't necessarily fall into this case. I don't even know if this E is necessary for this section, because we're actually, we require people to follow all state and federal laws, which that would kind of encompass into this circumstance. So those are the clarifications and points I wanted to bring up.
Okay, thank you. Let's start out with any questions from RAC members.
So are you kicking E out? Or is that something?
We're willing to, yes, we would entertain the discussion of that, yes.
Perfect. Right now?
No.
Any other questions from RAC members?
Yeah, I had a quick question for you, and I apologize if I missed it when I read the memorandum. But in the thing, it's phrasing that it's expected that the guides adhere to generally accepted and recognized standards and ethics of the profession. I don't believe that's defined anywhere. I couldn't find that it was defined.
You're correct. That's not defined, and that was at the suggestion of our attorney is when it was put in there. And I've read that a few times, has a couple conversations about that, and I don't know how to define that myself. But it is the individuals that are involved in Guides and Outfitters are a very professional organization, and they do have their own personal standards and stuff like that they want to adhere to. However, I'm not sure it's an enforceable circumstance for us. So.
Okay, and that's what I was wondering, because when I read it, I didn't think I missed it. And so it's in there, but it's essentially, and this isn't a criticism.
Sure.
It's essentially a throwaway phrase.
And the discussions that I've had with individuals have not clarified that for me. I've read that a couple of times. I've been in that same boat with you. And we just kind of move through it when in our edits of the rule, to get it to this point. So I'm in agreement with you in that regard.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to see something like that in there if it could be defined.
Yes.
But I'm glad I like this. It is one step anyway to try to standardize the guiding practice. So I like that.
Any questions? I know one of the public comments had concern about outfitter and guide being registered under one outfitter versus 2 or 3.
We, in the rule, it states that a guide can register with as many outfitters as they would like. They do only have to pay the guide fee the one time. And then they will just utilize the COR registration number to associate with another outfitter. The gist of it is we only want either 2 or 3 individuals on it's the bill the code that says this on the mountain at a time. So you can work for as many outfitters as you would like. We don't want to limit that.
Perfect.
So.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So guides and spotters work for outfitters. I'll just talk loudly. Do the outfitters have to have liability and workers' comp insurance? Like, I'm wondering because it seems a little confusing that you lump the 3 together when they're have sort of specific
Yeah.
roles?
Yes. In order for a guide or a spotter to work, they have to be associated with an outfitter. Many of those guides those guides and spotters are the 1099
Right.
contracted
Which
employees.
I realize doesn't make sense for them to carry workers'
Yes.
comp or liability, but do the outfitters have to? So I guess I'm curious, like, one of the things in the presentation was you have to report if a client dies on your trip.
Mhm.
Right, that's great. You should definitely do that. But I'm curious, like, if that happens, then if the guides don't have any kind of insurance, does that fall to the outfitter to cover that liability for the loss?
My understanding, and I'm not an expert
Sure.
on this. My understanding is if the guide or the spotter is a full-time employee of that outfitter, then they would insurance requirement. If they're a contracted one, then they have to have their own. That's, and again, that's my
Yeah.
understanding.
I mean, I think maybe just for like ease of understanding, like it might be helpful if that were delineated a little bit so that it would be easier to understand. Because I could imagine if I wanted to be a guide,
Mhm.
which nobody wants to be their guide, but if I was, I could show them where all the cool birds of prey are. But if I was a guide, like I would certainly want to make sure that, you know, the clients knew that there was insurance and protection
Sure.
for them.
And I believe that was the intent of our attorney when we're writing this bill, is to ensure that there is protection out there for those employees, which is why it ended up the way it is. And it is somewhat confusing, and it could potentially be adjusted or completely removed. And we just, as stated, follow the state and federal laws regarding employment.
Yeah, and maybe
Insurances.
that would make more sense. I also thought there was an interesting clause in there about you couldn't have been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude.
Moral turpitude.
And so what does that mean?
That's actually a legal phrase. It's a legal term that is defined.
Okay.
And that is based on some theft,
Okay.
crime, fraud,
So certain-
some drug convictions, different things like that. And that is a legal term that was put in there again. So, but that
I'm glad
does
it's
have,
defined somewhere because I feel like
yes.
what I think might be moral could be different than what Brad thinks is moral.
Yeah.
Right. So
Doesn't sound like Brad can be a guide. Not sure what to think of that.
thank you.
So, part of this with the public comments that have come in, and I don't know if this is coming from code or if this is in the rule, basically creating an official position of spotter.
And spotter was defined in code.
In code, it was defined there. Okay. Good. Any other questions? Okay. Any questions from the public? Want to come up? State your name at the mic, please.
Thanks. So, yeah, my name is Tim Pilling, and the question I have, I was good to hear because I was going to bring up Section E, but I think you talked about Section E. So I'm a guide and outfitter. We have SRP permits on the Wasatch, Cache, Manti, LaSalle. So we do extensive work in this area. But my question is the affiliation of the guides to the outfitters and the process. I'm just trying to understand. I know we've talked briefly, and I'm for this law, by the way, putting guides under the DWR, but the way Doppel had it structured, you got your guide license and you were free to work. Let's see, you didn't have any restrictions. And the reason I'm concerned about this, because let's say you specified that a guide had to work for a particular outfitter, then that starts to kick in workers' comp. So let's say you're a licensed plumber. You should be able to work for any general contractor you want. So I'm trying to understand what problem are you trying to fix by creating this connectivity between guides and outfitters. I don't know if anybody on the board's a contractor, but if you want to go hire a guy, you just go hire the guy as long as he has a license. plumbers, electricians, whatever the task may be. So I think we're trying to, and if you need a guide tomorrow because the guy got sick, how are you going to respond? You know, you want to say, okay, so-and-so's got his license. I'm going to call him, and then I have to report my guides as well. That's another comprehensive thing. The Forest Service has a list of all my guides, and I'm frequently emailing them and updating, you know, the guide list throughout the hunt. So it's a very dynamic situation. So that's kind of my question is, what problem are you trying to fix? Like interconnecting the guides and the outfitters.
I have a better answer than I did on.
Oh. Thank you.
My better answer is somewhat of a cop out. 657-72-4, the application renewal, 3I, and it talks about clients hired and employees compensated by that client in order to ensure compliance with subsection 23A4-1204 of the code. That's the code states that we must associate them together. So that's the answer. That's what the code tells us to do. It is in the bill itself. So, that's why we tie them back, because at the end, when they renew it, the code says we have to, the outfitter, the guide and spotter have to show, the outfitter has to show who worked for them that year. And without that tying them together, associating them together, I'm not sure that would be as easy as possible. And then that would, in order for us to have a record of it as well. So, if that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions from the public? All right. I want to summarize public comment on this agenda item.
Then we had 4 responses. Yes. 1 strongly agrees, 2 somewhat agree, and 1 somewhat disagrees, for a weighted average of 3.75. And we had 3 comments. There's 1 that supports the rule, likes that it helps regulate guides and outfitters. The other one, there's concerns with the bill language, but thinks it will hurt guides and outfitters.
Okay, thank you. You have 1 public comment card on this agenda item. Tim Pilling.
Thanks. So you kind of heard my comment. So I agree with Chad on eliminating D and E. I think that's a good thing. Workers' comp, I've been kind of looking into it, and it's a very complicated process when you have 1099 employees and how they're structured in your company. And I still don't have a clear answer. I don't know if anyone here does, but I would also suggest that we look at right below that, and I'll have to read that rule closer, but the interlinking of the rules, I think we should kind of revisit that a little closer, because that's when you start trying to run a business and you're trying to get people. Imagine if the general contractor world had to operate that way. Well, I can't hire you because you're not linked to my contractor license, but I need you tomorrow, or the person I'm working for is going to get really mad and fire me. So I think I don't think it's conducive to the kind of the goals of the state of Utah, where we're trying to be a entrepreneurial state. So if we can at least maybe address that a little closer, I'll go back and read the language in the code, because I guess I missed that part on the test. So anyways, thanks. So I think the thanks sections I'm talking about, was that right, Chad? It's B.
Could you clarify which section?
It's our section 3. Yeah, it talks about guides and spotters must obtain a certificate of registration for each outfitter they intend to work for. Yeah, it's right below the workers' comp paragraph. And then it goes on to the next page. But yeah, again, I think this is going in the right direction, because we were under Doppel for 15 years and nothing really happened. The fees are high, but I'm not going to complain about the fees. I know that's in the law. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah.
And one thing regarding that is if an officer engages or interacts with these individuals in the field, it's expected that they have these CORs on them. and that they're affiliated with an outfitter, and the spotter's affiliated with the outfitter. So it's tied together, and it's a way for us to ensure that it's done correctly. And we're very, very hopeful that the process is really simple, meaning that you go online and get the COR almost immediately. Yes.
Be conceivable for an outfitter to be able to kind of put together a list of potential backup guys ahead of time, the contingency plan before the hunt. Like if my primary guys get sick, and here's my list of backups that are already affiliated with me.
Absolutely.
So that the night before he can just go through his substitute list and
as I mentioned, the guides and the spotters only have to pay for their fee that one time, and then they can affiliate with whatever outfitter they want to be. And if somebody's on the mountain, they get sick, have to go home, they can just call that next person and get them up there.
so if I get my guide or spotter license, I can reach out to every outfitter I can find and say, if you can't work me steady, just put me on as a substitute, and then we're ready to go.
Absolutely.
If you need me.
Absolutely. And we just, and then you just follow, as long as you're following the bill with the 2 individuals on the mountain at a time, or the 3 individuals on a mountain at a time, we're good to go.
How difficult or how long does the process? I'm assuming it's just if an outfitter needs a guide and they contact someone's like, hey, can you come do it? Is it something somebody can do at night? Hey, I go in, I fill this out, I attach my stuff, and it's approved, or is
if they do it prior, it's immediate. I mean, they don't even have to do that. They can just go. We're hopeful. We're working on an app that you can do it on your phone. I'm not saying we're going to get there. We're working on it. So it can almost be.
But it's an online thing right now. How long does the approval take when someone fills that out? Like, is it?
It shouldn't take very much time.
Like if they've been approved, like they have that, they've paid that fee. Yeah. If they go fill it out for a new outfitter, is it essentially automatically like, okay, boom, it's done, it's in? So I think it's a non-issue then at that point if an outfitter really needs to add a guide that's not on their list.
Yeah. The one thing I will remind the RAC is that you have to, a guide or a spotter has to affiliate with at least one outfitter just to get the COR going, just to have their own CORs and then pay the fee. After that, they can affiliate with as many as they want.
That's not too terribly different than a real estate broker, somebody on commission. It's the same kind of thing. They're not an employee, they're an independent contractor. Real estate division does that all the time. Shouldn't be a problem.
Even to the analogy of being a contractor, if I know this is how it's going to work, I just have a whole list of preferred plumber guys, and I'm using this one. If he gets sick, I just go to my list of preferred plumbers.
And I guess if the plumber game warden shows up, they just need to have your paperwork together, right?
You started a new.
No, that shouldn't.
Okay. All right. We're on RAC discussion for this item. So any other comments from RAC members?
Guess my comment is appreciate you working with the Forest Service and federal agencies on getting that requirement for the applications removed, just so we're not both asking for the same thing at the same time. And I guess not super familiar with all of our procedures yet, but a discussion. Are we able to have a discussion on a motion before we get to the stage of motion?
We can discuss whatever we want at this point.
Okay.
If there's something specific that you want to comment on or have a discussion on, now's the time.
Yeah, so I guess I was going to propose a motion just to put it on the record what we were asking for from the Forest Service on behalf of federal agencies as far as permitting goes there. It sounded like there may be others who wanted to add something to a motion. No.
Yeah.
You got down to eliminate E. I forget, we've talked too much. What was he?
The workers' comp.
Yeah,
Or-
yep.
That-
That was the part I was
You wanted
wanting
to
to
add that to the
yeah,
motion.
whoever does it. Do that.
That's a comment I had. Yeah.
Any other discussion or we'll entertain a motion?
All right, I will entertain a motion to remove the requirement that a federal permit be included in the application for a state permit, and that a clause be added to clarify that the state permit does not grant permission to operate on federal lands. The applicant must independently acquire permission to operate from the relevant land management agency and have that permit in hand in the field for a copy. Also, to eliminate 72-3 2E, the clause on workers' compensation.
Perfect. I'll second that.
Motion by Avery, seconded by Steve. Don't pass me that paper.
Ryan's drawing over that paper down there.
Yeah, I'll say.
Is everybody, any discussion on the motion?
Clear, then the motion is to approve it as presented with those changes.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, okay, yeah, get it. All right. Call for a vote, Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it possible to take a quick break to see if we can get these microphones figured out?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's take a 5-minute break, see if we can help with some audio here. Move on to agenda item number 8, CWMUs with public land variance request with Chad Wilson.
Yeah, this is just, there's 4 of them that we're hearing tonight. 2 of them are renewals that have had the variance before, or the public lands in them before, and the other 2 are new. It'd be the first time they'd have public lands in them. So yeah, they went to the CWMU advisory committee. That the recommendations there were to approve them. That's what the division's recommendation is as well.
Okay. I know this gets talked about quite often, but can you just give us a brief recap from the program side of it of when public lands are included? What are the ways the public benefits, whether it's trade lands, additional permits? What are some of those ways that we see for the public benefit of the public lands being included?
Yeah, generally that's what it is either trade lands, which would be private lands that they open up to hunting, big game hunting, or they get additional, or the public gets additional permits based on that percentage. So those are the 2 main ones that we do.
Okay. Let's start off with any questions from RAC members.
Chad, along that lines, it seems like we've talked about this and help remind me. On the trade lands, is there anything that can be done to mark those? Yeah, that's up and going now with the CWMU rule change that we had last summer. So they got to post it just like any other, like the same requirements that are for trespassing. They got to post those lands that same way. So starting this year, is it starting this year? They will be posting the trade. Yep, this fall, all those trade lands should be posted on the ground, and it should be on our map as well. Awesome, thank you.
Chad, on the trade lands, has there been boots on the ground by biologists to make sure that's decent land?
Yep, that's part of the requirement too, is when we put them in, that the biologist has to make a recommendation and be out there.
Perfect.
Any other questions from RAC members? In that evaluation from the biologist, I know sometimes these comments have come up that equitable type habitat, is that one of the criteria, or is it sometimes can the trade lands be like a winter range for deer versus the public land being included in the CWMU as one that's habitable by deer during hunting season? So it's maybe not equitable that way. Is that, what does that criteria look like of when the biologist is looking at it?
Yeah, so it has to provide some benefit, right? So all those things are considered. If it's equitable as far as being able to hold animals during the hunt, that's one of the things that we look at. Now, there's not always a guarantee, right? So it could be a smaller parcel somewhere, but if it has the ability to hold animals during the hunt is mostly what we look at, the habitat being there to support them.
Okay. I guess a little clarification, because ability is a pretty broad definition, right? I mean, we're talking lands that, hey, I can go in on this 1 acre parcel and have a chance to find deer and elk, but the one they gave me is lowlands that maybe you catch something in a blue moon on a transition or something like that. I mean, how definitive are we getting on?
It's hard, right? Like there's a lot of subjectivity in it, but what we're trying to look at is the public land that's in the CWMU and the trade lands that they're somewhat equitable. Sometimes that equity comes in additional private lands. Maybe it's like on one of them tonight, it's a 2 for 1. So there's just a lot of factors that go in there. And we just ask the biologist to look at the totality of all of it and say, is this equitable or not? And maybe that's not a great answer, but I think there's probably some subjectivity in there.
One of these is in northern Utah, isn't it?
Yeah.
All of them? Is there a biologist here that
for these 4, yeah, Daniel's got almost all of them, and
Daniel,
just tell
can
me
you tell
earlier
us
he
about the
wanted to
trade
come
lands?
talk. So.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm Daniel Slee. I'm the Box Elder District biologist. So I'll start off talking about Ingham Peak.
Are we able to pull up the maps of these while we discuss them there?
I'll try to log in the meeting.
Should I wait till we get maps?
Don't make us feel good, Daniel.
Okay, so yeah, the Ingham Peak CWMU, it's been around for quite a long time. They take in several sections of public ground. Honestly, most of the sections they take in are not good quality habitat. They're just for fence lines. There is good now. Okay, there's one full section and then one half section. So about what's that, 1,000 acres or so. That's in really prime habitat for deer and moose. So that's one section of public land they take in. They give 7.5 sections of land of trade land in for the public land they take in. Honestly, the one main section of public land that a lot of people are upset about that they take in, it's the best habitat on the mountain. We do make up for that in a lot of quantity of other habitat that they've opened up to trade lands. It's not as good during the early muzzleloader archery season, but it is pretty decent migrational range during the rifle season. I hunted it this year on a box elder tag just to see what it was like. I only spent one morning there and I hunted about 2 sections. But during the morning hunt, I saw about 70 deer, 6 bucks, 2 little yearlings, and then the other 4 were like 3 points. And a guy that was camping there on the southern end of the trade lands shot a really nice 4-point on the trade lands. So there are deer there during the hunt. A lot of people hunt it. It's pretty popular. So that one section of public land they take in is better, but we get a lot of still pretty good deer habitat in trade for that. And then are we talking about prohibition? Yeah. Okay. And yeah, so this is Ingham Peak. Can you guys see that?
Yeah. I guess
Yeah.
Northwest edge. Is that a ridge line where it's kind of?
Yes, it's a ridge line, and they have it very well marked. There is a road that goes along that ridge line that is accessible, and hunters use it to access that more northern stuff. But they have it very well posted, and it's a ridge line and a road, so it is a hard boundary. Cool. Ingham Peak is up. Oh, sorry. We want to go to Prohibition now? Yeah, that's TLR. So Prohibition Springs, this map is kind of cluttered and confusing. So on the eastern side, that dark polygon is the proposed CWMU boundary. So it takes in several sections of Sitla land. I don't think they take in any BLM. It's all Sitla. They are a pronghorn CWMU only. So all that land they're taking in is just for pronghorn hunting. It is accessible to the public. Most of them, all of them, except for one parcel, I think, are accessible via county maintained roads. There's a small amount of pronghorn down there. Not a lot of people hunt it for pronghorn. They might now, that kind of side of the unit is growing. But so yeah, they're a pronghorn CWMU and they're taking in those sections of land. There are also mule deer on this land that hunters will still be able to hunt. The CWMU is just for pronghorn, not for deer. And then so there's the checkerboard on the southwest side. So the yellow is BLM, the blue is Sitla, and the other color that I don't have a name for is the land they're opening up for trade lands. So it's a 2-to-1 trade. They're opening it up for hunting all species, big game and upland game. The farthest west stuff is pretty good for pronghorn. The rest of it would be pretty good for deer. possibly elk too occasionally. And it's really good upland game hunting. And yeah, any other questions?
I guess almost the same question as the last one on that northwest angled edge that's got all the little.
That's a road. Yep.
That's
Or
road,
actually,
yep.
that's a fence. I don't.
Fence line with all those
It's a
little
fence
pieces
or
of
road, one of the two. Yeah. Yeah. So we did a lot of discussion with this CWMU and a lot of compromise. Their original proposal was to include deer and take up. So the kind of central stuff there on the where it kind of diagonals southeast, that's a mountain, really good deer habitat. They wanted to take that in as well. Through discussion with them, they decided that it wasn't worth it. They wanted to leave that out of the CWMU and let people keep deer hunting it. So yeah, they did a lot of compromise to get to this boundary.
Appreciate it, Daniel. Appreciate you
Yep.
checking on those and making sure it's a benefit to hunters.
For sure.
Any other questions from RAC members? Any questions from the public? Summarize public comments on this.
There were 5 responses to this one. 40% somewhat agree, 20% somewhat disagree, and 40% strongly disagree. For a weighted average of 2.4. There were 3 comments with it. There was a question about the location of trade lands for the Ingham Peak, and they support other CWMUs. And then there were 2 comments that they just don't think the CWMU should have public and trade lands.
Okay, thank you. All right. Don't have a public comment card for this agenda item, so open it up for RAC discussion.
I'm going to do my traditional rant and it's your last one, for a while. There should never be public lands in the CWMU if it's not landlocked. It just drives me crazy. I'm spitting in the wind because I know it'll never change, but I'm going to be consistent. I just hate it. The Ingrams is probably the best compromise. Still hate it that they're open, but I like that the trade lands are going to be multi-hunt and not just pronghorn. So I think that was a good compromise on their part, but I'll just do my consistent. We should never have public lands and CWMUs that are accessible. If it's not landlocked, it shouldn't be.
I'd like to go on record expressing appreciation. I feel like this year, this time around, done a lot better job explaining how it benefits the public. I appreciate that. It feels clearer in my mind this year than.
I'm going to echo both of them. I hate public lands being in CWMUs, but Daniel's done a fine job, it sounds like. So I'll be on the fence on this one.
This is a discussion that always comes up. We had a lot of discussion on this last year, the CWMU Rule Committee and what that looks like. There are aspects of code that comes into play with the way this was structured. I do appreciate, and I'll agree with Ryan. I think this is being able to see the benefit that comes either from trade lands or more permits or something, I think is being better explained than it has been in the past. Sometimes in the past, it just feels like the trade lands were there, but we didn't really know what we were getting for it. And so I appreciate that part of it. It's a lot of aspects coming into this with some different legislation that's come into play on corner crossing and other things. So do appreciate the fact that we, I think Prohibition Springs, opening up trade lands to more than just the species the CWMU was created for, which isn't always the case. So. Okay.
Thanks, Chad, for all your work on the CWMU. I've been kind of a grinder on you for over the years, so appreciate the work. And I just agree, same sentiment on everybody trying to do a better job of making sure what the public's getting. Again, it's hard. Just Anyways, just agreed sentiment. Hard to give up public lands, especially when it's prime public lands. I love the prohibition in opening up more species. I would love actually to see that become more of a something that almost becomes a requirement of these CWMUs with trade lands, is that they have to open it up to all species. I think that's what they gain from the big game versus what they give up in like small game and other species. I think would be another big win for the public. But anyways, just appreciate everything you guys have done.
I do think it's worth noting sometimes in some discussions with people that once public land is included in a CWMU, I think sometimes there's a public sentiment that that's now off limits. And if it's a deer CWMU, it's only off limits for deer hunting. It's still open for elk, for antelope, upland, and everything else. And sometimes I don't know if that's clearly communicated to the public. There's a sentiment out there that it's now off limits for everything, and that's not always the case. So.
I've seen that in some of the confusion in the signs that they use, because it oftentimes says no trespassing, like period. And that, I guess, is, and I've talked about this in the past with the signage, making sure like what is the repercussions? What is the ability to make sure it's the correct signage? Because I've seen it myself, places where it says no trespassing, and it's like, well, wait a second, this is public land.
Yeah, I've seen that a number of places as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Entertain a motion.
Motion to accept the division's proposal.
Okay, motion by James, sorry. Seconded by Nikki to accept as presented. Any discussion on the motion?
Has the signs, Ross, you brought up, has that been worked on? And so they're not a no trespassing sign? Because it's against a lot of the post public property.
As far as I'm aware, there's multiple signs out there that they're supposed to use the appropriate ones, and Chad could probably talk to. I mean, they just came out with the new signs to make sure they're posting trade lands. They're supposed to post the correct ones. Again, part of that's on the CWMU. You see some managers that they've got hunts going on, and I get they've got people on there, and they can be difficult to work with sometimes. There's supposed to be an avenue for the public to make comment, but I'm always just like, what's really done when those things come up?
Yeah, and I would say we do have that they should not put no trespassing when it's on a public land.
Perfect.
The other thing I would say is I would just encourage, if you come across some that are, let me know. I get really good response from CWMUs. If we find one, it's like, hey, you got to go get that one, go replace it. And they generally do that pretty quick. So yeah, please say something. If you see anybody watching this, please say something. We'll get it fixed.
Thanks, Chad.
Okay. Call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob? Yes. Randy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, thank you, Chad. All right, agenda item number 9, changes to R657-28 WMA exemptions from license requirement. Chelsea Duke.
Okay, I'm going to try not to be scared of this thing now. All right. Hi, everybody. Chelsea Duke, Wildlife Lands Coordinator for the division. If you're okay with it, I would love the opportunity to address a couple of points that came up during the public comment.
Yes.
Great. First, House Bill 309 is a bill that was passed by the Utah legislature during the 2025 session and went into effect May 7th. The requirement to hold a valid hunting, fishing, or combination license was put into state law and is not a rule that was implemented by the Wildlife Board. The DWR and the Wildlife Board are now charged with implementing and upholding this new law. Therefore, this rule proposal before you is meant to define terms and make some additional exemptions to this requirement as permitted by law. Second, I just want to clarify the authority of the Wildlife Board in relation to the new legislation. So the bill states that the Wildlife Board may not exempt an individual on the basis that the individual is not engaged in hunting, trapping, or fishing within a WMA. Therefore, the scope of the board's authority is limited to the following 2 items. 1, the Wildlife Board may make rules to define purposes of 1, what is meant to be expressly exempt under this title from the requirement to hold a license or cooperative agreement or certificate of registration to engage in hunting, trapping, or fishing, or 2, what constitutes an educational program or education or visitor center. And I just say this to make the point that the scope of what the board's ability to make rules about this is a little bit more limited.
Thank you for that clarification. Any questions from RAC members?
What counties is this for? I know some counties are exempt.
So we have 4. It is Davis, Salt Lake, Weber, and Utah.
If Washington County were to gain a WMA, would that also be included?
Great question. So Washington County, while the bill was being put through the legislature, was classified as a Class 2 county. However, there was a separate bill that was put into place that changes the population counts for what classifies a Class 1 and Class 2 county. So that bill also went into effect on May 7th, and that increased the population threshold. And so Washington County is now a Class 3 county.
How did this steaming pile of get dumped on your lap? But so,
like, do you want me to answer that?
You don't need to answer that. It's just your job to shepherd this through. So I understand. I appreciate you putting down the things that can be considered. Is there any possible way to? Is it only going back to the legislators to get something other than a fishing or hunting license? There are people that are not going to want to buy a hunting or fishing license. And if that being the case, and if we actually do enforce this, which I don't know how much we'll actually enforce it, they'd be more likely to buy that. What are the options, if any, there?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. So I'm going to answer that question in 2 parts. So the first part is that the law is very specific, and it says that it has to be a valid hunting, fishing, or combination license. So the Wildlife Board and the division does not have the ability to create or offer a third, or I guess you would say 4th, license option for non-consumptive or WMA pass, things like that. The law is very restrictive, and it has to be a hunting, fishing, or combination license. And then the second part of that is that hunting and fishing licenses help the division in a lot of different ways. So not only does that bring in money to the division for hunting and fishing licenses, because if you're unaware, there's not many general funds that are provided to the division, especially when it comes to land acquisition and land management. We are mostly self-funded, and we use license dollars, or we use federal excise tax dollars through the Pittman-Robertson and the Dingell-Johnson Act. Those are through the federal government. And so fishing and hunting license also brings dollars that are matched by that. So those dollars that come to the states through PR and DJ, that is based on license sales. So not only does your dollar get stretched because you're paying for the hunting or fishing license, but we also get additional funds based on those. So that dollar gets stretched a little bit more.
No, and I'm glad you put in that explanation. And I'm a fan for pay to play. I don't have a problem at all. If you're going to use these facilities, I mean, you have to pay for them some. So I'm good with that. I just think legislators had no business. This could have been handled differently and better, in my opinion. Don't respond. So, okay. One thing that you guys might be able to do, I'm shocked by some of the comments that came in on this and the lack of understanding on the public's part on what areas. I mean, I think there were 3 different comments on Kazi Reservoir. Good heavens. It's not anyone's listening, that's not a WMA, that's Forest Service land. So if there's something that could be done on the division's part to help with education on the areas that actually do apply, because very few people are going to go and watch the videos that are put together RAC.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. So for those individuals that had maybe just had a misunderstanding of which areas needed a hunting or a fishing license, I did reach out to those individuals, provided them maps. I wanted to make sure that those individuals knew specifically for the areas that they were concerned about, which areas required a hunting or fishing license and which didn't. So I did reach out to those individuals specifically for Causey and some of the other individual concerns that people had. And then second, we're constantly trying to educate the public on what these properties were purchased for, why we have wildlife management areas, and how we can all do better to manage them together. We are actively signing all of these properties to ensure that the public, when they come onto the property, can see at a gate or at a kiosk that this property requires a hunting and fishing license. And then if you follow the QR code, it leads you to our WMA page on the division website, which goes over all of those wonderful things about excise tax and why we buy property and what our mandate is to manage them for wildlife purposes.
Sorry, thought of one more. What type of enforcement will there be, and when would it actually kick in?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'd love to bring Chad back up here so he can talk to you a little bit about that.
Chad Bettridge, not Chad Wilson. We're going to give him a break. We have a WMA enforcement plan in place. The law did go in effect May 7th. So that WMA enforcement plan is also in effect. However, we are very, very heavy on the education side. We want to, we will contact people. We'll say, hey, you know, this is the circumstances we're in, and lots of verbal warnings, lots that will lead to written warnings, that if you get enough written warnings, you could potentially get a citation down the road. But we're going to lean heavy on the education side to begin with.
So, sorry, if it comes to a citation, what are we talking about? A trespass citation? What does that look like?
It would be a violation of this bill, of this code, and it could potentially, well, it could be the bill or the rule, and if we would cite under the rule, it would be an infraction. If we would cite under the bill, it would be probably a Class B misdemeanor. So we would lean towards the rule for a while.
Right.
And will you have signage as well addressing this particular issue there?
Yeah, it's all part of the same signs that are going up there. Is it right?
Would you enforce that differently with, let's just call it the one down, I forget the name of the WMA, but there at the mouth of Provo Canyon that's more of a mountain biking mecca than it is. Oh yeah. So it's, I mean, you barely can call that a WMA, I feel like now. And a lot of those trails were cut illegally to begin with. I know they try to go in and do work and say they're doing maintenance and doing good for the WMA, but that's not the case. What if there's people caught in their cutting trails? Is that going to fall? But
so that was if they're illegally using the WMA and making trails and stuff, that's a different violation. However, specifically on WMA, and Chelsea may speak to this a little bit more, there are special use permits that those groups do purchase, obtain through the Division of Wildlife, that come with sort of the way they pay for it or utilize it is service projects. So they do have to go in and do things that are in accordance with what the division would like them to do on specific on that WMA. But, and as Chelsea may talk here in just a minute, if you're under 18, this rule does not apply to you. So you have to hit a certain age before you can violate the rule.
I'll tell you one thing, Ross, that WMA has been coming through the Habitat Council for 4 years, and it's in a lot better place than it was 4 years ago, but it's still a mountain bike park.
But that one's in Utah County, right? So it's exempt from this.
No, it's
I have a question, and this, I don't know if it's helpful or not. Did the legislature or the people, the legislators who wrote this bill, did they reach out to the division and ask for like feedback? I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I go to Farmington Bay a lot. And I feel like there is some value in being able to be in that space with species that are not game species. There are a lot of species out there that are not game. And if the goal is to educate people and to get people invested and caring about wildlife and natural spaces, restricting them from natural spaces seems somewhat counterintuitive. I agree with Randy. When I was interviewed by Ben and Justin years ago to sit on the RAC, they asked me about, what I thought I could bring to the table because I'm not a hunter. Excuse me. And I said what Randy just mentioned before, like in my mind, I feel like everyone I know would be happy to buy a license, whatever that means. If that's if we have to buy a hunting license, if there's something like a duck stamp that's for watchable wildlife or something like that. And I feel like it's a little short-sighted to not create an opportunity for discussion about that. And instead, I always have a little bit of a problem when the legislature creates laws for wildlife instead of allowing the division and this process to do it, because that's like, why are we here if the legislature is just going to do whatever they want? So it feels a little conflicting to me. So I'm just curious if they reached out to you at all about this bill and how they could maybe make it a little bit more inclusive, which I realize we're not allowed to use that word anymore. But it just feels a little short-sighted.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions in there that I would love to address. So first, were we contacted? Yes, we've had conversations about this bill. This is not the first time that this bill was introduced at the legislative level, and we were able to have conversations about what that might look like. At the end of the day, what's put into the bill is up to the legislative body and then a subsequent substitutes. So that's how I'll answer that first question. And then to clarify with you on, you said Farmington Bay.
I know Farmington Bay has some exemptions. That was just one example.
Okay, I just wanted to ask about Hassenjäger versus
Yes.
Echoes Wildlife Education versus the actual waterfowl management area. Okay.
Well, I mean, and I think in your presentation, you actually talked about the waterfowl management area being exempt in some portions of it, which is also just very confusing. So if you're driving through and you pull over to look at a bird in the area that is not part of the exempt area, like, am I going to get a misdemeanor because I'm going to maybe not go to Farmington Bay anymore, which is really disappointing, right? I've been taking my son there since he was born. So, and I love the Echoes Wildlife Center. I think that's great. I love all of the WMAs in all four of those counties. And I realize that there are some pressures that are put on those by public who may not have an avenue to help fund, right? And I think that's ultimately what this is about, right? Is funding the work that's happening in supporting wildlife. And I think that there is really a way to do it without excluding an entire group of people to benefit another group of people, which is what, to me, that it feels like has happened.
Yeah, and before we jump back to Farmington, I will just address to say, I hope that non-consumptive users aren't put off by this in the sense that they cannot come and recreate on these properties. It's just in order to do so, there has to be a level of buy-in through the hunting and fishing license requirement, and then you can come and continue to recreate in those areas. And I hope that provides all the members of the public a little bit more buy-in and a little bit more ownership of these public lands and what their intended uses and purpose of purchase was for. So then back to Farmington, that map is confusing. I know that. I apologize. We're trying to get signage up there. So you'll see on Farmington Bay as a whole, you have the WMA portion, the waterfowl management area portion, which is some ownership of division and then some sovereign lands. And then you also have the Echoes Wildlife Education Center and the associated Hassenjäger Reserve. So if you are accessing this is what is in front of you today, is this rule proposal that the definition of an education or visitor center include Echoes Wildlife Education Center and Hassenjäger Preserve. So if you come into the parking lot, you park, you come visit the visitor center and you walk the trails that are right there and you want to bird or recreate or anything right there, that area would be exempt from this requirement because it is defined as a visitor center. So we'd make sure that signage is accurate. But if you were wanting to venture off of that area and you wanted to drive on the road that's over a little bit more to the east, you wanted to get onto the waterfowl management area, you must cross division property in order to get to that sovereign property. And so you would need a hunting or fishing license to be on what is the waterfowl management area. There is one accessible trail that you can walk from Hasenjager to the sovereign lands, and that's not accessible by car. So we're hoping through education, through enforcement, with educational opportunities and lots of signage, that people will either choose to stay on Hasenjager or choose to purchase a hunting and fishing license by accessing Farmington Bay.
So is the nature center currently not included in the exemption?
It is because the definition of a wildlife management area explicitly precludes that facility. Or the division wanted to call out specifically to ensure that the facility and the Hasenjager Reserve was included in said definition, which is in the Wildlife Board's authority to do so.
Okay, any other questions from RAC members?
Some discussions regarding this proposal in relation to federal land management employees. You said that there's a possibility of just writing a exemption or giving federal land management agencies or employees permission. I wasn't able to see where that was in the rule requiring the hunting and fishing license. Are you able to identify where that authority is granted in the rule?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would actually be in the law that authority would be granted. So if you're looking at the bill or you're looking at the law now that it has come into effect on the 7th, the division does have this ability. It says one of the 3 ways that you can get onto a property is through valid hunting and fishing license, permitted to engage in that use under a contract or given or other permission given by the division, or third through that property right. So Avery speaks to the fact that we do have oftentimes a lot of federal partners or even state partners like Forestry, Fire, and State Lands who access wildlife management areas to either get to other places or to, engage in their job duties. And so the division feels that that second bullet point where it says is permitted to engage in the use under a contract with or other permission given by the division. So most of the times with other agencies, I'll use Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, for example, we have existing MOUs. We have existing contracts in place that talk about the management of these properties, whether they're joint or whether they just border each other. And so we feel that it would be easy and make a lot of sense to clarify in that contract that we already have with these folks that they can access the properties when they're conducting their routine business. It was brought up that maybe other federal agencies can't enter into contracts like that right now. And so we could also just give permission in 5A2, and it just says, or other permission given by the division. So we do feel that we have the avenues to do that. Or, of course, you are also welcome to recommend to the board that there be an exemption beyond what we have brought to the table and recommended for you today.
Thank you.
Special use permits are not part of the exemption. So if you have a special use permit, you're exempt from the requirement. Is that correct?
Correct. We would consider a special use permit to be a contract. So it would fall under 5A2, that exemption. And so you would be covered if you had a special use permit or you were involved in an activity that had a special use permit.
It isn't a question, but just a comment, but directed at Chelsea. I think she's a terrific spokesperson for this particular. I can't imagine hardly anybody else handling that subject matter as well as you do. And to have your hands and your arms around both the legislation and the regulations. Thank you.
Second.
Any other questions?
How hard is it to get those exemption
passes, if you will, like for the Youth Waterfowl Festival. And those are fairly easy to get, or?
Yep, we have a process in place where in 30 days you can have your permit. It's often faster. My team is quite responsive and able to get those permits in place. And that's very common. We issue that one for the Bird Festival every single year.
What are some of the, I guess, what are some of the agendas? How can you get those? Do you have it in place? What would be considered able to get a special use permit?
Yeah. So we have an administrative rule, R 657-28. This is the one that we are proposing to amend. And there's a section in there about special use permits. It is section 8. And I will read for you what is required for a special use permit. So special use permits will be required for research, seismic testing, surveys, organized events, commercial gain, or other special activity or use. So what that calls out to is that there's a lot of unlawful use of division lands, and that's where you'll see a list of if you have a group of more than 25 people, up to 50 if they're immediate family members. That's an unlawful use of division lands. If you have an organized event, such as the Bird Festival or a race, that would be an unlawful use of division lands. The exception to that, of course, is if you get a permit, such as a special use permit for that activity. So that's where the rule would call into place. These are the types of activities that would be permitted. And then this section of the rule, section 8, talks about what an applicant must do, what the division must consider when choosing to issue or deny that permit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was, I saw on the Central last night, some stuff brought up about a trail in Hobble Creek and the access and use to that. I guess my question more than that on the fishing licenses, would that not fall under, there's some easement provisions where it's been public use for so long that it would be exempt from this rule?
Yeah, so I will answer that a couple of different ways. So even if a trail has been created and it has been utilized for an extended period, there's a legal doctrine where you cannot adversely possess public lands. So unless there is a written easement in place for a trail, which we have many, that's one thing that we're doing and working really hard just to update our property records to ensure that if there is a public easement on one of these properties, that's documented and signed for the public so they know where they can access. I do not have a record of that being a public easement, so people would need to have that hunting or fishing license to access that, and we're making sure the signs are up.
But there's other law that goes back to, this is where my question, I've seen it with private lands where there's been, public's been using that land for 20 years. And by definition, that use gives that, it's I forget the definition of the name of the easement specifically.
Prescriptive easement.
Yes, there you go. Thank you. So that does not apply in that situation. If it's been used for that long, that wouldn't apply for the public at that point?
Correct. Prescriptive easements do not, cannot be argued against public land.
That is totally correct. You just can't do that.
For those existing easements on the impacted properties, are those going to be available to the public to see where those easements are?
Yes, we would update that in our database, and that is the database that the division has and updates gets pushed to the WMA map that is on our website. It also pushes that data to Onyx, so things like that you can have right on your phone and have that available to you. So we're actively making sure those things are updated.
Any other questions? Okay, any questions from the public? All right, we'll summarize public comments.
Okay, there were 13 responses to this one. 15% of the respondents strongly agree, 8% somewhat agree, 8% are neutral, 8% somewhat disagree, and 62% strongly disagree, for a weighted average of 2.08. There were 13 comments with that. Comments in support, they like that it requires those using the area to help pay for the upkeep of that area. There were 10 comments that do not agree with requiring a license to access the WMA. There are some that support paying but want something other than a hunting or fishing license. Comment that it impacts families without licenses. Out-of-state people using the areas for dog training will need a license for hunt tests at areas like Lee K. But that could be covered if a COR is issued. Several comments about Farmington Bay. And we talked about a few about Kazi that were confused that the reservoir is not.
All right, thank you. Just have one public comment card for this agenda item. Angie Wanacott.
Angie Wanacott with SFW, and I'm just here to support this rule for the division. Thanks.
Thank you, Angie. Okay, open it up for RAC discussion.
Can you imagine what it would have been like if the legislature wasn't the one that did this?
I was hoping we would have a member of the legislature here to address some of these questions.
I'm all for this. I've spent the last 4 years on the Habitat Council trying to come up with money out of thin air to manage WMAs. Now all of a sudden we're buying more WMAs with an understaffed division, underpaid division. You know, this makes total sense to me. You know, big game has been funding Nikki, non-game species for a long time. And
I please don't
No,
misunderstand what
no.
I'm saying. Like, I am fully in support of paying to play. Like Randy said, I think there's not, and I feel like I've been saying this for years to anyone in the division who will listen to me, like create an opportunity for non-consumptive users to participate. If people don't want to buy a hunting license, then what can they do? And maybe that's just the simple answer is we just have to buy a hunting license. And that's
or fishing, you're
or
gonna,
fishing
yeah.
or combo, right?
I'm pretty sure it takes a hunter education to buy a hunting license. So that's why they threw the,
But I can get a fishing.
yeah.
license.
Yes.
And I'm happy to do that. I'm not saying that I think it's a bad idea. I'm fully in support of funding the division. I'm fully in support of funding wildlife and habitat research. I think all of that is really valuable. I think I have a little bit more of an issue, like I said, with the legislature creating the laws and not letting this process, which is in place to do that, do it.
I think they probably did a pretty good job if I'd take a stab at it for the fact that they didn't create a stamp or something. Cause now we get the PR money, which is big time.
Sure, the match.
The matching funds are big.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's why they did that.
And I think and I think knowing that and learning that, I think helps people feel better about it also. But you also get matching if you buy a duck stamp, don't you? Not for a duck stamp. I thought.
Duck stamps federal.
Oh,
federal.
it's
Yeah, it's a
federal,
federal.
that's right.
Yep.
But anyway, I will buy a fishing license. I have a fishing license. I just don't have a hunting license. And I'm happy to do it. But my organization also has to do special use permits. So that's fine. And I'm happy to contribute to that anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I agree. We need to do better.
I've been cringing watching all these new WMAs come on because we could barely fund the ones, you know, that we already had, and lots of projects. Would we kick down the road over $2 million in projects we couldn't fund this year, Randy? So
I will say, again, align kind of your comment, Steve, is I do have a little worry for the division to be able to actually enforce this. I feel like we've heard at this meeting several times that the law enforcement section of the division is already spread pretty thin and they do an incredible job. But I do worry a little bit for them how they enforce this with all the other things they have to enforce. But maybe we'll raise more money with hunting license and we can hire more.
I don't think anybody's going to buy a hunting license. I think the fishing's going to go crazy.
Right. They're going to go through the roof. I think that's great. And I think the easier, well, that's not true. It's really easy to buy fishing license. But I think, yeah, if on the QR code, there's an option to like buy a fishing license in real time, it's done. I think lots of people will do it.
It would be nice to be able to track that a little bit better, to see how many non-consumptive users are using the WMAs instead of just, oh, we had a huge influx in fishing licenses. We must have a whole bunch of people fishing. It'd be interesting to know how many of them are not going to fish, but they're there to go look at some birds.
100% James.
Could I speak to that?
Please.
So one thing that the law enforcement division, sorry, getting used to that. One thing that the law enforcement division is doing is they have a form that they are filling out each time they check a valid hunting and fishing license. So when they approach an individual, they ask for a hunting and fishing license, they're required to document that, whether they give them a warning or a citation or just have an educational moment with the public. In that form, they are also collecting data about what that person is doing on the WMA. Whether they have the license or not, they're asking, are you here to hunt, fish, walk, bike? And there's a laundry list of things that are being collected. So we can have that data.
That sounds great. And I'm assuming that we probably get those surveys all the time of how many morning doves did you hunt this year, or how many, if they send out a survey of that, I'm sure that would probably remedy that fairly quick if they've been on a WMA to hunt or fish or to recreate.
Now, when this came out, I first had a really hard time with it. But actually, even up until the day I had a hard time with, I'm all for the pay to play. I shouldn't say I have a hard time with the pay to play type mindset. But then doing a little bit of research, having the fishing license that we get the additional funds from PRDJ, I don't think there's a better way that they could have actually written this up. I mean, it basically, we're getting the pay to play and then we're getting additional funds. And I think the biggest issue is education. I mean, when you read the comments, and I guess to put it on record, thank you to the public that responded. I mean, this is the most response I think we've ever had from non-consumptive on any issue in a long time. And sometimes I wish we'd see this type of response from the hunting community on certain topics that we sometimes don't get. But anyways, where it ultimately came down to, and I think the education for the public's going to go a long ways. These properties, I think, are misperceived as this is just public land like any public land, and they're having to pay to access their public land. And that's not how these properties came about. That's not why they exist. And it's all been made possible on the backs of hunters and fishers for a long time. And with that, that's where it made me, I guess, feel a little more, I guess, comfortable in the sense of, the end of the day, this is all about wildlife, big game, small game, all game. These aren't just an entitlement public land that we get to show up to. And for some, and in certain aspects where they talk, well, I can't access this or that or the fee. I heard them talk, I won't take credit for the comment, but a lot of complaints from the mountain biking industry. And what do you pay to go up to a ski resort? And that's a lot of federal land that it's like, you're willing to go pay $100-150 to go ride a resort, but we don't want to pay 20 something bucks for a fishing license that goes all back into that. And we just, at the end of the day, the point was made. Without these licensing fees, there is no money to manage, to take care of these, to purchase. So I just, again, didn't love it at first, but as you get into the layers of everything, I think I guess I'll give credit where I first didn't want to give credit.
Randy brought up a good point, and I'm going to agree with him on this. Part of it is going to be I think the onus is on the division for the communication side. And I say that because a couple of the public comments that came in, to be fair, there are 2 sections of WMA at Causey Reservoir. To be more fair, the news article that called out Causey Reservoir got it completely wrong. So public perception of what was going to take place, I think, is what bled into that. But it's a perfect example of why we're going to have to put the work into the communication of this to the public as a whole, and making sure that the right information is shared from the right resources. KSL or ABC or whoever the heck put it out there was probably not the right source. Anyway. I didn't know that either because I was wondering where those comments came from about Kazi because it wasn't in the presentation. And then I found that. So pretty sure that's where it was, or Facebook, who knows? So. Yeah. So. Okay. All right. Entertain a motion.
I've got a little additional discussion. I know that the division can give permission, and the Forest Service used to have a statewide MOU with the division, and that would have been a good vehicle to cover something like this. In recent years, we haven't been able to get that renewed, and we are somewhat concerned about piece by piece permissions for WMAs or certain tasks, and would be a lot more comfortable not putting our employees in a bad position where they're fixing a fence and inadvertently stepping onto a WMA, breaking the law, or our trail crews walking through, for example, that Kazi WMA. There's a Forest Service trail that passes through the WMA and back onto Forest Service. And those are just a couple of examples, but there are a lot of WMAs providing access to Forest Service lands along the Wasatch Front. And we would be considerably more comfortable if we had an exemption in the rule so that we're just not putting our employees in a place where they're inadvertently breaking this law.
They're on the clock. I don't see a problem with it. I mean,
I do have a motion to address that, unless anybody has any comments.
I agree, Avery. Although it doesn't affect BLM lands as much. I was trying to find an example of where we would, but even fighting wildfires, it's like, it's just one more thing that people worry about. So that would be good.
Is that something we have the ability to do within the rule, or is that something that we do?
you want to include the BLM just so it's there?
Yes.
Federal employee, state it as a federal employee or something?
Yeah, I've got a motion that would include them.
Let's let her answer that.
Sure. You have a couple of avenues. So first is what I brought up under that 5A2 clause where it says a contract with or other permission given by the division. So we could provide written permission to the agency as a whole or individual WMAs or individual circumstances. We could write that written permission, or we could have a contract, or you could choose to recommend to the board that federal employees are additionally exempt in addition to what we're proposing already, which is division employees, volunteers, contractors, invitees.
As you make that motion, I'd support it as long as it clearly defines that while in the course of their work, not just the employee.
Yes, well, performing official duties. So yeah, as soon as they're up to talk, they're just like anybody else.
Okay.
All right.
Motion.
Motion to pass as presented with the addition that an exemption be added for hunting or fishing license requirements for federal land management agency employees while conducting their official duties.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Avery, seconded by Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you, Chelsea. Okay, next up is agenda item number 10, Sage Grouse translocation with Heather Talley.
Scared of microphone.
Don't break it
Alright.
now. We just got it working.
Okay, do you guys have any questions or anything for me to start?
Questions?
Do you have a rough estimate of how many birds you're planning?
Yes, so we're looking at this August, we would move 10 to 15 in the fall. And then in the spring would be about 15 to 20, but more female, where the fall group would be mostly male. And we're not going to start anything on the Parker yet, that we're just wanting to get that approved so that we can, when the resources do become available, for us to start translocations.
So one, upland, yes.
Yes.
So these are, and I forget, I apologize, I forget where you're taking them from in the Uintas.
Yeah, Blue Diamond Mountain.
Okay. And so it's going to be about 50 birds. What's the population out there, you know?
Yes. So I've estimated some populations of those actual source sites, but I can show you some graphs as well. And we do have some updates on just today of what our counts are looking like, but they're not going to be final. And because last time to get our counts in is today. So on Blue Diamond Mountain in the Uinta SGMA, it looks like we are up another 20%. We had total males counted so far of what we've calculated as 848. And do you want me to share the map with you, Randy?
No,
Okay.
that's I'm
Okay.
familiar enough with the area.
And then Parker, this year we are up to so far 1,533.
What's your, is there a specific target? Are you guys at where you're wanting to be, or were you looking for more? Where are we at as far as numbers versus?
As far as counts versus what we want sage grouse to
Yes.
be at. I can share a graph with you guys to see what the trend is looking like over time, but generally we just always want more is the answer to that.
So there's not like
Yeah.
a specific number like we see with like deer and
We don't
outdoors?
we don't have a sage grouse objective,
Right.
just that we want as many sage grouse as possible within our SGMAs and to be counted on Lex. But if you do want to see the trend I have from last year's, from the 2024 trend line, I can share with you.
If you're hooked up, if it doesn't take much time, I'd love to see that.
1 second, hang on. Let me just join the meeting really quick.
Heather, where are these birds going?
They are going to the first Tabby Mountain, which is in the Strawberry SGMA on our WMA there. So we have a lot of restored habitat, and that increase of usable space is available, but the birds just aren't distributing there because of their high fidelity to lekking and nesting brood rearing sites. So increasing distribution within SGMAs, we're just hoping to boost overall populations and just do good things for grouse. 1 second. Oh, I don't have the, hang on. I got to get to the link. Sorry, Randy. It's not hard. You're good. I just thought it was on my calendar. 1 second. Anything else while we're waiting for me?
Yeah, if you can multitask. So I tormented you earlier and we had conversations. And
We did.
some of my questions and stuff. You sent me some surveys, some 3 studies.
Yeah.
2 of the 3 studies talk about move the birds during the leaking season. So we're moving birds in the fall and
Yes.
in the lekking season.
Yes.
So why go outside of the recommendations out from those?
Definitely. So there's been lots of other studies as well. Sharp-tailed grouse and Gunnison sage grouse have also been moved in the fall. So it's not something that's been traditional with greater sage grouse, but because we're trying to establish new lekking locations, we're trying this because it has been done with other species to see if we can make it work. So, and we do have Brian Maxfield online to answer specific questions to those areas where he's wanting to pilot that effort. But that is just something that we would like to do with our knowledge of sage grouse biology and with it being done with other galliforms.
Yeah, if he can chime in, I'd love to, because I'm all about growing birds.
For sure.
But this is one thing that scares me, is there's no active weddings, right?
Right.
You're trying to introduce.
We're going to get some.
Introduce birds there. So I would love to know. I'd love to be reinsured. We're not sending these birds on a one-way trip.
I understand. Brian, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, we do have birds on the Tabby Mountain, that area, the WMA. We see birds, just a few broods, not very many, not what I'd expect with what the habitat's like. And it's that fidelity thing. We've seen males down there in the springtime, just haven't seen them strut. These birds come from Strawberry Mountain or Strawberry Valley down in there to a portion of the area that we're talking about releasing during the wintertime. So they'll be mixing with other sage grouse. And this, like Heather said, this is something new, moving greater sage grouse in the fall, but it's not something new for upland game. So, you know, I'm going to do everything I can that they're not getting a one-way ticket and work on it. So, but we're trying to do something to help out the population, try and get more birds. Just like Heather said, we just want more birds all the time.
Yeah, no, and I want more birds. There's birds are it. I don't care about anything else too much. It's all about birds. So
We appreciate you, Randy.
Yeah. So this is an experiment then with sage grouse as far as transplanting them outside of the letting season, because we don't have let. So it is an experiment. Right?
I wouldn't say with all sage grouse because it has been done with gunnison, but for greater sage grouse, yeah, it is something new. And we do think that based on their behavior and biology, we feel it will be successful. We have some past studies, like Brian was saying, other galliforms, it's been successful, but we're just, there's no way of knowing unless we give it a try.
Are you planning to do anything to artificially establish a lek site with playbacks or decoys or anything?
It's not going to be during lekking season, so we weren't planning on it.
But that next spring?
The next spring. I hadn't spoken to Brian about that. Brian can certainly weigh in if you'd like to weigh in about playbacks and things like that.
I had not planned on playbacks. It would be kind of the fall release, similar to what they've done for sharp-tailed grouse. They do that fall release, and then when they release in the spring, they kind of release where those males maybe start a lek. There's a lot of theories on lek formation with grouse and how it actually happens. It's not 100%. So that's what we're working with. I do have 3 or 4 locations that I'm looking at maybe doing some clearing a little bit, see if they can come in there. They do like open areas oftentimes with the more bare ground, not heavy grass on the ground and things. Sage grouse do. Sharp-tails are a little different, but so we do have, and some of these are near where birds have been observed from Strawberry Valley, the wintering. A couple of those areas actually specifically. So we'll be looking at those here this summer, and we'll do, like I said, I'm going to try and do everything possible to make this successful, and especially with these fall birds.
So I have a question. So is it just Tabby Mountain that you're going to place them?
That's just for the fall releases. So why don't I just bring up this map so that we can kind of address all of the source and release sites at once and make that a little bit more clear. We had a couple of screenshots in the presentation, but it might be helpful to go through this entire thing. So here's Blue and Diamond Mountain. Whoops, sorry about that. Where we plan to take birds from. And initially for this coming fall, we'll release them here in the Tabby Mountain release area, and that's in that Strawberry SGMA. Then we have Browns Park that can, once we have a few leks established at Tabby, we can move birds to the Browns Park area, but because it's so close to the Diamond Blue Mountain area, we would take those from the Parker. I'm sorry that I don't have a real mouse, so it takes a minute. So there's our Parker Mountain area. That's the source site in blue that would go to Browns Park. And then we would take birds from the Blue and Diamond Mountain area to this Tidwell Slopes, Mytogi Mountain when resources become available for us to do so.
Is there is just genetic diversity to take clear from southern Utah to go to northern? Is that the reason?
No, it's not. Looking at some of the genetic studies that have been done, we already have some pretty decent heterozygosity in those areas, but it's just a matter of trying to keep them from just going back to their source site. We've got to move them far enough that they won't travel back. I know that Jim Lamb once mentioned that a female with her brood even still traveled quite a ways because it was too close to some release sites. So, mhm.
Are you planning to mark them?
Yes. Brian, do you want to speak to the transmitters? I believe you're planning on necklace style VHF.
Yep, every one that we move will have a necklace. So it's kind of not the new school GPS that you might hear about that we've been using more recently on grouse. We're going to go back to VHF. The collar that goes, or the transmitter that goes right around their neck. It's kind of the standard, especially for a lot of the older sage grouse studies, and that's what some studies are still doing. BYU's got several or quite a few birds in the Strawberry Valley already fitted with those kind of transmitters. So it'll help us. We'll have to do the tracking on ground, but that was what we wanted to do, just to reduce, help the birds out. We don't want to put those big backpacks on these guys.
They're a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
They are a lot cheaper.
A lot cheaper.
We're planning on banding as well.
You have Lotus towers in the basin?
Not right now, but I have six of them that we have parts coming for, and by the end of our fiscal year, we'll be ready to start installing 6 of them.
Will you put Modus tags on when you're banding then? If your goal is to eventually have Modus towers in the area versus recatching? I mean, you'll recatch them anyway with the transmitters, but.
Yeah, the Modus towers in this area won't really work very well for sage grouse. Modus works for longer distance migration.
Yeah.
And especially for small birds and things like that, or pelicans, but that do big migrations. And sage grouse, it's such a small migration that the Modus tower wouldn't work too well for them.
Okay. Any other questions from RAC members?
We will. You want to come help?
Yes.
Okay. You have it on the record.
Can't take them home, Randy.
I love sage grouse from afar. They're not very good.
Okay, any questions from the public? Okay, want to summarize public comments on this one?
Yep, we had no responses to this work.
All right. We have one public comment card. Angie? She didn't write her name on the card, but you're the only one left, so.
It's only because Troy is in Alaska.
Oh.
So Andrew Wanacott with SFW. I just want to thank everybody for all the work that they've done for sage grouse, and hope that you keep doing the great work, and we support the division on this. So.
Thanks, Angie. Okay, let's open it up for RAC discussion.
I'll just make the motion to approve as presented.
Second. Motion by Randy, seconded by James to approve as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, thank you. We'll go to agenda item number 11, still with Heather. Possession and release of hen-reared game bird rule amendments.
Do you just want a quick summary
Yeah,
of those?
just quick summary or any clarifications from the presentation or anything?
Yeah, sure. So the mycoplasma testing isn't mandatory for the facilities to conduct. However, the Division of Wildlife, we're opening this up for ourselves to be able to go test any facility at any time for random sampling to detect prevalence of any MG or MS in these facilities. Also, just a slight change that a commercial license with UDAF is needed only if the 1,000 birds or eggs are held for longer, 60 days or more. So that helps clarify a little bit with people just wanting to transport birds for field trials or other large releases. And yeah, we had a little bit on avian influenza and explaining some of that testing a little bit more, but that's about it. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Any questions from RAC members?
Curious as to why the elimination of the microplasm testing.
Yeah, that's a great question. What happened is we were contacting our constituents, letting them know that this was implemented in 2023 and wanted to make sure that people were being compliant. And unfortunately, we received a lot of opposition from constituents from our sister agency, and we weren't able to, without the support, we weren't able to keep that in our rule.
So you're almost feeling like this will be a better
Yeah, and
ultimate
then-
outcome.
Definitely. Well, we do think that this is a great compromise. And with this direction moving forward, if we have a lot of detections, then we can definitely rectify that in rule in the future, and we'll have more supporting evidence to make such a change.
So I know the answer, but I'll ask you just what's out there. Have there ever been any outbreaks in any of the farms?
There has, and that any kind of mycoplasma outbreak results in a depopulation of the entire flock.
And this is transmittable between domestically raised in the wild and vice versa. Correct?
Yes, correct.
And the virus never goes away.
Correct. That's why the depopulation needs to occur.
So I'll throw out there, this is just, maybe it should be on the comment section, but this will go too fast. I hate the ag department's not requiring this testing anymore. It's just foolish. We've got large operations raising domestic razor birds going to be released in the public and be sick. It's silly that we're not testing it. But I appreciate the division randomly testing and doing the best they can.
Thanks, Randy, for the comments.
Any other questions from RAC members? Any questions from the public? Summarize, did we have public comment?
Nope, Heather did a good job. She got 0 responses once again.
All right.
Way of looking at it.
Okay, one public comment card. Angie.
Angie with just SFW. We just want to thank Heather for the work she's done on this. And, we help with this for the pheasant hunt. So it's a kind of near and dear to our hearts just a little bit. So we support this.
Thanks, Angie.
Angie. Trying to get you back up so I can tell you never mind, but.
All right, open it up for RAC discussion.
I'll just make the motion to pass as presented.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Randy, seconded by Rob to pass as presented, sorry. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote, Ryan?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes.
Nikki?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. One last agenda item. I'll turn that time over to Jim.
Okay, yeah, so with the end of the year, the end of the line here, it's time that we need to either elect a new chair or elect Brad again, as well as a vice chair. And so with this one, we'll open it up to nominations.
You guys are doing an awesome job.
If there is only one nomination for each, we'll just do a vote by hand. If there's more than one, we'll do a secret ballot. We've got some papers you can write who you want on there. So with this, Brad will be able to vote now as well, and so. We'll just open it up to nominations for chair, and if we want to do that one first, then come back to vice chair, we can do that. Or if you specifically have names in mind for chair and vice chair, we can nominate them now.
Brad, do you
want to still do it.
That's right. That was my question.
Yeah, I'm good with it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do, Brad. You really
Appreciate that.
do.
So I nominate Brad.
I'll second.
Does anyone else want to do it?
I think we just say, yes, go ahead. It's yours.
Do you want to do it? Oh.
If you voted Nikki on, would you vote to stay?
I don't have a hunting license, nor have I had one for 3 of the last 5 years, so I'm not qualified to be the
That's why I say.
the chair of
If you're
the,
voting.
yeah. Dang it. And no, I wouldn't want to do that anyway. I see what Brad has to go through. I'm not interested.
Okay, well, if there's no other nominations, all in favor of Brad being the chair next year and continuing on with the gavel, raise your hand. And that's, oh, I was about to say 9-1.
Yeah.
It's unanimous. Okay, nomination for vice chair.
I nominate Ryan.
Do you want to still do it, Ryan?
Thank you, Nikki, for
We
asking.
need a second. I'll second.
Okay, any other nominations? Okay, we'll just move to a vote. All in favor of Ryan continuing as vice chair, raise your hands. And that's unanimous as well.
Nice work,
Great.
boys.
Thank you.
Uh,
I
thank
agree
you,
with
thank
you
you.
all. I too think both of them have done a fantastic job.
Appreciate that. Appreciate, we said it earlier, I'll say it again to Nikki, Randy, Junior and David. A lot of time and effort goes into serving on the RAC, and it takes time away from your personal life and a lot of different aspects. Appreciate everybody's dedication to that. Nikki, I think you've done a fantastic job. You got to step into a role that was a little bit foreign to you, right? And to,
So much. I've made lots of new friends.
yeah.
Someone else has to start bringing cupcakes. So
We'll make that assignment. Yeah. Do appreciate that. Okay, that's all we got for tonight on the agenda. I'll call for a vote to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, sorry.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.